Good morning, Greenridge.
Good morning.
My name is Porter Sprigg. I'm a senior at Gordon, like Mark said, in Massachusetts, studying English literature and biblical studies. I grew up here at Greenridge, and I'm so grateful for this church and its children and youth ministries, which were hugely influential in my faith development. I want to especially thank Denny Sunderly, Bill Rodriguez, Mark Grunke, and Jim Starcher, as well as all the other staff and volunteers who poured into me along the way. You know, it's been a tough semester at Gordon, and I'm pretty exhausted, so naturally, coming home, one of the things I'm most excited about is staying out all night with your teenagers at the locker room. Yeah, so I'm excited for that, and please sign up. Like Mark said, it's a blast just being there. I'll be preaching today from John 2, talking about Jesus at the wedding in Cana, which is fitting because tomorrow is my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. If you see Peter or Kristen after the service, give them congratulations. 30 years. Good job, guys. So if you please turn with me to John 2 in your Bibles. And we will be reading verses 1 through 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine, after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Who's thrown a party before? Yeah? And anyone thrown a wedding reception before? It's not easy. If you've ever thrown a party before, you know how difficult it can be. And there are so many details that the host needs to keep track of, and often things don't go as planned. My school had a dance this year, and our campus events council advertised that Chick-fil-A would be catering the event, so people were really excited. Unfortunately, there was a long line to the dance, and people had to stand outside in the 10-degree weather in their dresses and suits, waiting. But they knew that Chick-fil-A was inside, and so they were excited that they would get there. But unfortunately, all the people who got there early ate all of the chicken. And so when the people finally got in from the cold, the only snack left at the dance was broccoli. And you better believe that if Jesus had been at the dance that night, I would have gone up to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, they have no more chicken. If you want me to put some broccoli into that vase over there, I could do that." But unfortunately, no broccoli became chicken that night, and so the party was not as good as it was hyped to be. And so whether it be from a lack of preparation or external circumstances outside of the host's control, parties often go wrong and leave people mumbling about broccoli on the way home. It was no different in the first century. In fact, the pressure to host a good party may have been even stronger than it is now. Wedding parties were supposed to be incredibly joyous occasions for the entire community, and sometimes stretched over a couple of days. And wine was a central aspect of the party, as it helped sustain the laughter and dancing for hours and hours. It was seen as a bringer of joy and vitality. Water was actually less safe to drink than wine. It was easier to get sick from drinking it because of bacteria, but it was also considered less fun to drink than wine. And don't worry, I turned 21 this year, so I am legally allowed to preach about this. Now, in Jesus' time, it was the bridegroom's responsibility to provide the wine. So it was the groom's job to give the wine. And he had a master of the banquet, who we see in the story, who would help with some of the logistics. But it was the groom's job to make sure that the wine was there and that the joy of the party was sustained. So running out of wine was a big deal. Wine was an expectation at the party, not an option. It actually would have brought about a lot of shame and disgrace for the groom and his family to run out of wine so early. And some scholars say that guests could have sued the groom for running out of wine at his wedding, which, that's a rough wedding present. Not enough alcohol at your reception. But it's important for us to know all this because this is where Jesus steps in. Because Jesus provides the wine in this story. And so Jesus is taking on the role of the bridegroom. He's fulfilling the role of giving joy and vitality to the guests. The party was going nowhere fast, and Jesus stepped in to protect the groom from shame and disgrace through his miraculous provision. It's my hope this morning that you and I can see how this party is a lot like my life and your life. We want to be in charge of the details. We want to build joy and fulfillment into our life, and sometimes we think we can do that on our own. And when we feel a lack of joy, we think that's just because we haven't found the next thing yet. Maybe when I get married, I'll be fulfilled. Or when I buy that house, that's when I'm going to be happy. Or when I retire, then I'll finally be able to have joy in my life. And we might even invite Jesus as a guest to that party. Say, Jesus, I want you to be a part of my life. I want you to be enjoying life with me. But we don't always see him as the source of that life or the source of that joy. And eventually those efforts will fall flat and we'll realize there's no more wine here. The joy I've been seeking, that vitality in life, is missing. And the thing that we need to realize is that you and I are not the bridegroom. This party is not about us. And as long as we focus on ourselves or try to fix things ourselves, the party will fail. And that failure, of course, will bring shame. However, if we recognize that Jesus is the true bridegroom, that he's the one we need to look to for provision and joy, things will change. Jesus can't just be a guest at your party. He needs to be the groom, the host, the provider of joy and vitality. John the Baptist points this out in John 3 as well. He says, the bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend, talking about himself, the friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater. I must become less. John the Baptist knew that the only way for his joy to be complete was to embrace Jesus as the bridegroom and put himself aside. So I don't know how your 2018 is ending. Some of you might feel really good right now, coming off of a wonderful Christmas celebration, and some of you may feel very drained, very empty of vitality and joy. But it's my hope that today this passage can meet you wherever you are in life and teach you that Jesus is a provider and giver of joy to empty and thirsty hearts. So the first thing we can learn about this passage comes from Mary and the servants, and that is we must call upon and submit to Jesus' authority. I love how Mary spurs Jesus into action here. Verse 3 says, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. She doesn't say, hey, Jesus, can you go make some wine for the poor folks? She just says, there's no more wine. Kind of like when mom says, the dishes are dirty, or your room's a disaster. She's not just observing a detail. There's an implied command in that statement. And there's an intimacy displayed here by the fact that Mary just says, there's no more wine here, and Jesus immediately knows, all right, she wants me to do something about it. And there's also a confidence that Mary has in her son's power and his authority. Even though this is his first miracle in the book of John, it's clear that Mary knows that Jesus has the authority to do something about this problem. And you see, when we come to God about our emptiness, about our weakness, about our frailty, we should call upon his authority as well. We should trust and know that he has the power to do something. And it's interesting how Jesus responds. He says to her, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." Now, we are supposed to be like Jesus, but kids, don't call your mom woman when she asks you to do something. I don't think that'll work out well for you. But in this cultural context, calling someone woman was not disrespectful, but actually may have continued that intimacy, showing that they just know each other very well and that he anticipated, she's trying to get me to do something here. And many interpret "my hour has not yet come" to mean it's not time for my public ministry yet, or it's not time for me to do miracles yet. But in light of the fact that bridegrooms were supposed to supply the wine, it's possible that Jesus is saying, "Hey, it's not my wedding yet. You know, this is not my wedding. I'm not in charge of the wine." And we'll return to this interpretation later. But either way, it's clear Jesus didn't give his mom a solid yes or no. But of course, Mary immediately turns to the servants and says, "Do whatever he tells you." So Mama wants wine. So we learn about Jesus' authority in this passage, but we also learn a little bit about the authority of moms, okay? But what's fascinating here is how the servants respond. They listen to Jesus right away. Even though he's a guest at this wedding, for some reason these servants, they recognize and they acknowledge Jesus' authority, and then they submit to it. Verse 7, Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. They did so. Just like that. They heard Jesus' voice, and they obeyed, even when it seemed like a strange request. I mean, they're out of wine. Okay, go fill up the ceremonial purification jars with water. Okay, Jesus, sure. But they just obey him right away, even though they can't see why he's telling them to do that. And then transformation follows. Do you do that? Do you obey God, even when you can't see why he's telling you to do something? As I began my junior year of college, I prayed that God would give me a big calling to impact my campus in a big way. I wanted to step up as a leader on our campus. And so I said, "God, please give me something big that I can do." And then I felt him prompting me, "Take swim lessons." What? No, God, I mean something like to impact other people. I don't want to do that. And then he said, "Take swim lessons." You see, I've been terrified of water since I was a little kid, and I'm a pretty bad swimmer. I'm at level 3 right now. So at first, I wasn't like the servants at all. I mean, I ignored him, and I rationalized it away, saying that must not have been God. But the main reason I didn't do it was because I didn't want to. But then God placed me in a prayer group with 4 people in it, one of whom was a swimmer on the Gordon swim team, another who was a legitimate swim instructor, and then the third person started praying one day, "God, help us to obey you in the big things and the small things." I thought, okay, God, get the hint. So I asked my swim instructor friend to give me lessons, and let me tell you, it was humiliating, and it was scary when I was flopping around in the deep end. But it did help build a humility and a trust in God that I wouldn't have built had I not obeyed. And when a big controversy did pop up on the campus later that year, I had the courage to step up as a leader on the campus, and I truly believe that some of that courage developed from those swim lessons. So God knows what he's doing. If he tells you to fill up the jars with water, fill them up. And if he tells you to do something small that seems insignificant to you, do not ignore him. And if he tells you to do something big, do not ignore him. He wants to transform and purify us, but we need to obey. We miss out on Jesus' miraculous transformation when we ignore his voice. Do whatever he tells you. Just like Mary says, do whatever he tells you. We must call upon and submit to Jesus' authority. The next point we've already touched on a bit, but as we submit to Jesus' authority, we will experience purification and transformation. Look at verse 6. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. This detail is no coincidence. No detail in the Gospel of John is. The fact that this miracle takes place in jars used by the Jews to ritually purify themselves demonstrates that Jesus' transformational power also comes with the power to make people clean again. Jesus is the fulfillment of all the Jewish ritual purification practices, and his provision involves the purification of our hearts. He can turn water into wine, and he can turn you and me into people who resemble his character. As we obey him, God transforms. This Thanksgiving break, I watched a classic film, Kung Fu Panda. And in that movie, the flabby panda named Po is chosen as the dragon warrior, the one who will protect China with his kung fu skills, which Po does not have. And there's a powerful scene about halfway through the movie where Po is planning to quit kung fu altogether. He's talking to his master Shifu, and he says this, "Look at this," pointing to himself, pointing to the overweight panda that he is. He says, "Look at this. How are you going to change this into the dragon warrior?" And Shifu looks back at him and says, "I don't know." You see, Po sees his body shape and his lack of any skills as evidence that there is no possible way that I'm ever going to change into what I'm supposed to be. This is just who I am. I'm never going to change. And if we're honest today, church, some of us are like Po. We are spiritually flabby. We're not exercising our faith on a daily basis. Galatians 5:22 says, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." Do we exhibit those things every day? The Spirit is in us. Do we see the fruit? And we might think, "Oh, I show some of those things sometimes, but I'm no dragon disciple, and I never will be." Do you believe that Jesus can change you? And if you say yes, have you been changed? Are you the same person you were spiritually 5 years ago? Many of us might feel like Po in that moment, looking at how messed up we are, and just asking Jesus, "How are you going to change this?" But instead of saying, "I don't know," Jesus looks us in the eye and says, "Through the power that rose me up from the grave," that same power can reach into our hearts and transform all that which was dead and bring it to life, bringing that joy and vitality, just as he did at that wedding. Jesus can destroy your pornography addiction. He can heal your impatience with your spouse. He can help you overcome your greed, your anger, your laziness. He can give you a heart for the poor and the marginalized that you never had before. And he can turn you into a bold, obedient disciple that doesn't coast through life as a cultural Christian, but as a true follower of the King. And with that transformation will come a joy and a vitality, because you'll start living the way you were created to live. When our life is empty and our ability to host our own party